Well, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everybody, wherever in the beautiful world you are. And I'm delighted to be back this morning with our focus on Australia, which we haven't had for a couple of weeks, months actually now.
Mm.
But very, very delighted to have with me back as my guest today from Australia, Kerri Saint. Now, oh, sorry, that phone of mine is not on silent. Kerri, it's just delightful to have you back because you've been a guest before and you spoke on the forced adoptions, and you were actually one of the unfortunate adoptees, right, who was
Yes.
forced. I want to encourage our viewers, if you haven't already seen Kerri's previous interview, we'll leave the link in the description area below. But maybe just before we carry on and move on to what's happening now and how it's happening, etc., give us a little bit of, just if you can, in a short synopsis, tell us a little bit about your background and just how you got into this amazing work you're doing right now.
Yeah. Thank you, Chantelle, and thank you for inviting me back.
Such a
Yes, I was born in 1962 here in Australia, and I was told that my mother was 16, didn't want me, and died giving birth to me. And I believed that till I was 20. Went to an adoptive family that was pretty horrifically abusive. I was working in charcoal pits, child slave labour by the time I was 5, and was subjected to horrendous abuse and torture even. So um, I explained last time, like I went into detail of things like, being suffocated and set alight and beaten and thrown out of the house and things like that, things that no child should ever experience. And when I went searching for my mother, because I went searching for a grave, I found out that my mother was actually alive and was 34 at the time she gave birth to me and had 4 children to her husband who passed away. So I was like 20 and find this out that I'd been told a lie about, how my mother felt pregnant. I was lied to about, my birth, the whole lot. And so when I actually met my mum, and that's a story within itself of how that transpired. But I've also met my dad. I have a good relationship with my dad, and so basically that inspired me to start lobbying, because at the time my records were sealed, so I had to do all my searching without any help from any government body, any counsellors or anything. And I'm being told this news that my mother had died giving birth to me, and I wasn't allowed any of my, what they call, identifying information. The only reason I knew about my mother and her name to go searching was I'd been given my adoption papers by my adoptive mother, and my mother's full name was on that. She never remarried, so I could easily find her. So I started lobbying with some other adoptees, and we helped set up a group association for adoptees, and we helped lobby to have the laws changed so people like myself could actually get their information. And that was in
How
19.
long? How long did you start this lobbying? If I can just ask you that. How long ago? How
1980,
long has it been going on?
1983.
Okay.
So it's a long time. I haven't been lobbying that whole time. I lobbied for a long time, and then I backed off for a while. And then back in 2004, I got involved again, because in Australia we had an inquiry into children who were institutionalised and abused, kids in foster care and institutions, and I thought that they would include adopted people, and they never did. So that kind of got me a little bit cranky, and I thought, well, that's not right. So I started getting involved and meeting up with other groups, and my first apology from any institution was from the hospital where I was born. They offered an apology to adoptees who'd been brutally separated at birth, and they also apologised for the abuse that we suffered. And that's the only apology that's included abuse. So all the governments, state and federal, have refused that so far. Um, So I joined up with a bunch of other people. I was able to rename my group, Association for Adoptees, and I began lobbying quite hard on calling for a Senate inquiry into former forced adoptions. And of course, that happened around 2011, and then state and federal apologies followed in 2012 and 2013. My state was the last state to apologise. And
can I, sorry to interrupt you here. I would just like to ask you, when the states are apologizing to people like yourself that have been through these horrific ordeals, what are they apologizing for? Are they actually acknowledging that this is going on? And if so, through that acknowledgement, there has to be some kind of guilt, that acknowledgement of guilt, of participation, of turning a blind eye, of whatever that might be. And then through that, surely there has to be some kind of a investigation into these things that then start bringing these perpetrators to the fore. And that would then surely take them to these disgusting adoptive parents who did these things to children like yourself. So my question is, I find this apology, what are they apologizing for? Because if you're apologizing for something, then you need to set it right, because that's what a true apology is.
And I totally agree. And I was not happy with the apology that was given, because it refused to admit that adoptees had gone to homes where they had been abused. They refused to acknowledge that the screening process of adopted parents was extremely flawed. And we have foster care systems where parents are, they go through a training program, and they're really sort of looked into and make sure that they don't have criminal records, and they're not known by the police, and that they're not got drugs and alcohol problems. When you adopted, all you needed was a couple of character references and prove that you had a job and you were married. That was pretty much it. And so I was actually invited to meet with government on the word, like putting together the wording of the apology here in Queensland and also federally. And on both occasions, I said to them straight, are we going to get an apology for being abused? And they said no. They don't want to go down that pathway. And I do not comprehend why not. And I just think it opens up a whole can of worms that they don't want opened. Now, what they have apologised for is for allowing adoptions to be processed the way they did, and the way that the mothers were treated within the institutions and the hospitals, and that the mothers were forced and drugged and abused, and that their human rights were violated. But somehow,
the question remains on my lips, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but the question remains, why were these mothers drugged? Why were they violated? Why were they abused? Why were their children taken away from them forcibly? Who was giving instruction for this to happen? So again, as you say, this would then open up an entire new can of worms as to deeper investigations, because we all know, I think everyone watching this program knows where that's going to lead us, right?
Well, let's have it put it this way. Though many doctors, nurses, social workers, and solicitors were named, not one person has been held accountable for what happened. It's this cloak of it's an institution or a system, but not a person, any person. And when you get into the very personal details of the women, the mothers, that and how they were treated by the nurses and the doctors and the social workers and the clergy, was just criminal. And they were drugged against their will. And why they were drugged was because any mother that seemed to put up any defense or fight to keep her child was drugged, so that it was much easier for them to trick her into consent or force her into consent. We've got mothers who left hospitals that don't even remember that they gave birth, or whether they gave birth to a male or female child. And so that's what they're apologising for. However, there's been no compensation paid yet by any hospital or whatever. I know that some mums have received some small compensation by some religious institutions. However, they've refused to pay that compensation to the adopted child. Now,
Who are these, for starters, who are these religious institutions that are paying compensation? Are we talking the church here?
Yes, definitely, yes. Mostly Catholic. I think there was a Salvation Army. There was a lot of church run. They were all involved in the hospitals at those stages as well. So there were institutions for wayward girls. So the girls would go in there, and they would be held against their will. They couldn't go anywhere. They were threatened with the police. They were threatened with all sorts of things. I know of mothers who were put in the local jailhouse for a period of time because they were pregnant. And I know mothers that were threatened with police, and I know mothers that were had electric shock treatment whilst they were pregnant.
I would like to just say as well, and I don't know if I sound a bit like my sound. I don't know. Every time I start speaking, there seems to be an echo in the back, but I hope it's fine. I know someone in Australia, and this person I know very, very well. So this is not even a hearsay story. This is first-hand knowledge. Who was she 15 or 16 when she fell pregnant?
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously when she was, and this was a decade ago. She's now 26 or 27, somewhere around that.
Yeah.
And she had her child in one of these wards for teenage mothers, or hospitals for teenage mothers, or something like that. And what she said in Australia, and what she said to me was that the doors are literally locked.
Yes.
And that 1 out of 20 of these teenage mothers leaves with their baby.
Mm-hmm.
And this was, thank God she did not have that problem. I think her mom was very, very present. Yes, somehow she managed to escape that, but she was a teenage pregnancy. Thank God has her son healthy, bouncing, and no problems. But it creeps me out to think what a close call that could have been for someone.
Oh, definitely. And we have had people contact us and tell us they had close calls, and they've managed to keep their child because their family rose up and supported them. And what we say is that many of the women that were affected by former forced adoptions, the average age was 19. They weren't all young girls, and like my mother was 34 and an adult. So if they could, so it was generally vulnerable women whose families felt, for religious reasons or shame or whatever, that having a child out of wedlock was a threat to their family and their way of society and fitting in with the neighborhood and whatever, then they would put pressure on the girls, and they would go into these institutions, and the girls were basically given no option, no supports, even if the boys wanted to marry them. And like, I've got mums who were engaged to be married, and I've got mums who were teachers, social workers, nurses themselves. So, and then back in those, like I say back in those days, but you had to be 21 to be categorised as an adult, but you just had no rights at all. And so on the file would be BFA. It was a secret code the mothers didn't know about. So as soon as a mother went into the hospital, give birth, or see a local GP or whatever, that was on her file. So they knew, everybody knew how to treat her to ensure that this child was taken for adoption every step of the way. There wasn't a time there was any let up at all. So she had no choice. So some mums just resigned themselves over, and others fought and fought and fought to the end and still haven't given up fighting, getting their child back. And they're in their 80s or 90s. They have not given up. And the trauma has been horrendous. Like I said, 40% of the mothers never ever had another child. That's how horrific the experience was. And 1 out of 12 families in Australia are affected by forced adoption. That's a heck of a lot of people who are affected, you know.
You mentioned to me just before we actually went live that the government in Victoria has now is starting to pay compensation to these victims.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that. And is it the mothers, the fathers? Because we can never deny that the fathers, in many instances, too, have been affected by this, right?
Oh, definitely. Yes.
And although as a mother it is horrific that you've got to have your child that you've grown inside of you for 9 months ripped away by these disgusting hands, without any control, absolutely. And then, of course, the children as well. So what is this about, and what is your thoughts on what this compensation is now?
Well, Victoria decided to hold its own inquiry into adoption, and I know that there are adoptees that got involved in the inquiry to share how they were abused and ill-treated and mistreated within the adoptive family. And they got many submissions from adoptees, but somehow, again, we've only had the Victorian government at this stage state that they're only offering compensation to the mothers, no one else at this stage. They've set aside $4 million, which sounds fantastic. However, they're only offering $10,000 to sort of like a discrepancy payment or emergency payment to mothers who may be suffering or terminally ill, suffering a severe illness from like PTSD or whatever, or are really unwell or homeless. So it's a $10,000 upfront fee, like, you know, some form of compensation. But to me, it's like, well, $10,000 for a lifetime of trauma and having your child kidnapped from you, stolen, is...
I have no words for that. I honestly don't. I think it is a disgusting insult to every mother, every child, every father, every family member who has suffered at the hands of those atrocities.
Yes.
And to offer $10,000 compensation only if you have some form of PTSD or some kind of physical or visible affliction.
Yeah, you have to prove
that has been caused by that. Tell us about the process that these mothers have to go through in order to get their pittance of a $10,000.
Well, I had to look it up because, you know, there's no adoptee actually being offered that. It was quite lengthy. I was a bit aghast at the, you know, you've got to prove that you had your child taken, where you had it taken from. You've got to supply all these documents to prove who you are. And if you can't supply, because see, a lot of the mothers' information was lost. Like if you ring a hospital or an institution where you were housed, they will tell you, oh, no, sorry, we don't have that because it burned down or there was a flood. And this is how they hide our information on us. So often mothers have nothing to prove that a baby was taken from them. So now it's stated that you can sign a consent for those offering you the compensation to go and search that information. Well, good luck to them. So you're going to have to prove at some level. Now, I don't know about you. I've been incredibly sick in my lifetime. I've got a very rare autoimmune disease, and I was incredibly unwell for years and could barely walk, talk, see, or walk. Now, if I was hit with that, to go and do all this effort to apply for compensation, I probably wouldn't have bothered for $10,000. And if I was terminally ill, I don't think I would have bothered either. $10,000 won't even pay for your funeral. Not here in Australia. Like, so yeah. So what else did they do? They offered $200,000 to community groups, to probably peer support groups, and to help people. But that $4 million, I don't know how far that's going to go in helping people, like in the amount of people who had children taken.
It's absolutely, I mean, it's insane. And as I was saying earlier on, because what are they acknowledging there? What are they saying sorry for? Because if they're saying sorry for something, they must then be prepared to rectify what the wrong was, for which they're apologizing.
Look,
And
all the recommendations from the Senate inquiry was very clear that criminal, unethical, and illegal practices occurred in the taking of these babies, right? And that the government was responsible because the states pocketed the money that the federal government gave to the states for these women in these circumstances to help them raise their child. But the states pocketed the money, and that came out in the Senate inquiry. And who was in charge at the time was the health department. And they went kicking and screaming the whole way to actually give an apology. So it's been through a lot of pressure from people within society and victims, and some good politicians, who do really care. But you've got a lot who are very resistant to any form of compensation going to mothers and their children. The Victorian inquiry, because it did receive quite a number of submissions from adoptees who'd suffered abuse, they've at least verbally said that they will look at compensation for those victims later on down the track, but mothers first, because you've got to think about the time frame. A lot of these mothers in their 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
So
I almost feel like this is done deliberately, because that was actually going to be my next point. I was going to say, these mothers cannot be young anymore. I'm sure many of them aren't even around anymore.
No.
So they don't probably have the energy or the strength to stand up in court and claim this and go through this ridiculous rigmarole to get $10,000 compensation for something that is so disgusting. So it's like, to me, it just seems so contrived. Why only offer the mothers compensation? Why not the children? Because the children are more of an age where they're going to start digging up the dirt, right?
Well, they're going to wait. They're going to wait till we drop off, Chantelle.
Yes.
They're going to wait till we die. I mean, I'm 60 next month. All right. I have not received 1 cent of compensation for what I endured. My adoptive parents were never held accountable for what happened to me. I mean, you've seen my spine in the first interview I did. I've got this fractured spine. That's pretty horrendous. I've got to deal with that every day. And it stops me in my tracks. So I basically get frozen from here, chest down, and can't move. And I'm on pain meds twice a day from this abuse that I grew up with. And I didn't start to remember the abuse until I was only 30, because I blocked it out of my life. And it wasn't until I much later in life that I had a serious car accident and was assaulted in my place of work, that more memories came out and just flooded me with horrendous stuff. And trying to even get help for what was happening to me was utterly a joke. It was a joke. I couldn't believe that the mental health system or psychiatrists, psychologists never grasped the depth of forced adoption and the abuse that occurred. I mean, by all intents and purposes, I shouldn't be here. I shouldn't be sitting here talking to you, Chantelle, at all. By a miracle of God, I'm here talking to you, and that I'm not a drug addict, or I'm not an alcoholic, and I'm not homeless. And I shouldn't really be here, nor should I be functioning the way I am. So, you know, I've lost adoptees. I know of adoptees who have committed suicide. I know adoptees who are so physically unwell they can barely function. They would rather have said they would rather have been aborted than adopted. That's how horrific what they've been through. Now, I had I was in the local paper. What date was it? July. Shine Lawyers here in Queensland is looking at doing a class action, and I got a call to see if I would be part of an interview about it. And so I did that interview, and then I wrote to the Minister of Child Safety to let her know we had done this interview, and as I'm on what they call Queensland Stakeholder Committee on Adoption and Permanent Care. And I thought, well, now's the time to sit down and have a chat. It's been 10 years since Queensland apologised. That's coming up on the 27th of November is our anniversary date for that, which is being held at Parliament. So I wrote her a letter and I said, you know, I think we need to sit down and talk about these issues. There was 6 of them that I wrote down, 6 major ones, and one was the statutes of limitations and redress. It was services, and it was trying to get help for people who were exposed to the drug stilbestrol, which was given to mothers to dry up their milk and is cancer causing. They often would give it to the mums prior to giving birth. It passed the placenta and can stay dormant in the body for 40, 50 years and come out as all sorts of cancers. And then we want discharge for adoption to be free, because adoptees are paying anything up to $40,000 to get out of their adoption, and integrated birth certificates. And I had a meeting with the department about 6 weeks ago, and I was extremely disappointed at the response from them. Queensland is not interested in removing statutes of limitations or redress. And at the end of the day, I left feeling like, how do you get say you got into power and then have none? Because they were saying, well, government is a very slow moving wheel and this takes time. Well, I didn't see a slow moving wheel when we had a pandemic and had a $250 million COVID camp set up here in Queensland, which a handful of people have stayed in. So the hypocrisy on this is to me, it's huge. And yeah, so I wasn't happy about that. So I'd written to the shadow minister, and she responded. So the shadow minister, the opposition to the people who are in power, invited me to go and speak with them on the very same issues. So I'm not sure what's going to happen, but I think I've stirred a little bit of a nest that, you know, and people are listening, and whether to me, like, I'm not sure of their motive as to why, but I don't care as long as they get something done, because what happened to me, in the fact of remembering all this abuse that had been locked away, I found out how broken and the fact that our mental health system and our GPs and social workers have no comprehension of forced adoption and the impact on somebody that's been through what I've been through. And in fact, they nearly killed me. So it's been by my very own experience, I felt quite driven to enact change, and that is push for a Senate inquiry, push for apologies, push for services, push for redress and compensation and education and training and awareness. And so I then took, after, you know, like sitting back and listening to the minister say that the government is a slow moving wheel and I just don't know what we can do. I don't know where to start and everything. Well, I kind of sat there listening to it and said, gee, I know I'm nobody. I said this to her. I said, I know I'm nobody, right? I don't have a PhD behind my name or anything. And I am unwell, but I do get some things done. And I'm kind of wondering why the government, with all its resources, with all its money and with all its, so-called, really talented people, can't do anything. So in the last year or so, I've actually been working on trying to figure out a way to help the public be more educated on forced adoption, because we need people to understand that every time we go to a doctor's appointment, we're asked our medical history, and we often don't know. And that could be life-saving. And every time as we go through life, when something happens to us, our adoption is right in front of our face, incredibly so. And unless you're adopted, you don't realise what they are, and they become insurmountable the older you get. They've already proven that grief in forced adoption does not decrease in age, it increases. Yet there are no, So I've written a couple of songs, and they are on being played at the moment. People are starting to pick up on them, but they're being played at Parliament this year, both songs. And my first song I wrote was called A Crime Not Known, which is basically a whole bit of a song about forced adoption. And the second song is Chasing Rainbows, and that's about adoptees finding their biological family. And once they do, they realise that the mirror that was stolen from them and their worth in that, like when they understand, when they see this mirror image of them and habits and the way they hold their face and interests, they begin to understand that they have great worth. And so I actually wrote that and those songs. So it comes out in a little booklet. So I've designed a little booklet, which is very much comes in like a little CD, which will be kind of like that big, right? Yeah, it goes into a CD. That's not it, but that's how big it will be. So you'll have, how you buy a CD and you have a little booklet in it. So in it is the artwork from a brilliant mother who had a child taken called Jan Cashin, and an adoptee called Victoria Fitzpatrick. And they've given their artwork, some of their artwork over to illustrate the songs. And in it is a synopsis of forced adoption. There's be a little bit of a history, sort of a bit about myself, but it also give you resources to go searching for the Australian Institute of Family Studies report that surveyed 823 adoptees, and it showed that adopted people are 4 times more likely to attempt suicide than non-adopted people. At the time of the study, it was proven that 75% of the respondents were suffering from a mild to severe mental health disorder at the time of doing the survey, which was only in 2012. And even though these reports happen and the government is aware, they're still not jumping at trying to fix it. So little old me, who's a nobody that just decided to have a go, has created these songs with a little educational booklet with peer support groups and information that I can leave at a general practitioner in the hospital, just share around. So the booklets are free, and the songs, if you go on Bandcamp, you can buy a song for $1, and all that money raised goes into helping adopted people and mothers, and to lift the education and awareness around what happened to us. I mean, someone's got to do it. I mean,
I think, I'm sitting here, and I think people like yourself, and I have the privilege on this channel of hosting some truly amazing beings, very, very brave souls like yourself. And I have to say, I think it's amazing what you're doing, because it's such a tough job getting the initial response, reaction, people, just not just the people that you asking to apologize, compensate, take responsibility for their actions, etc., but also just the general public.
Yes.
You know, we are so unaware that these things have been going on. Those of us who have really lived a blissful existence where these kind of horrors don't occur. So I think it's amazing what you're doing in terms of the awareness, the lengths you're going to. What I want to ask you as well is, you obviously deal with a lot of people who have had similar situations to yourself. Are you finding more and more people, as with also the SRA survivors, etc., from the forced adoptions, are coming out, starting to speak?
Oh,
express?
definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. And since, you know, I did the interview I did with you some months ago was my first YouTube interview that I'd ever done. And so I've had adoptees speak out, like reach out to me and join my group. And I've had another interview with GABBI, and I had even more adoptees actually contact me and join my group.
That is fantastic. That
yes.
is so great, Kerry. Wow, that is really, really great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what I see, adoption has been, look, I think I'm getting my words tongue-tied because I know what's going around in my head, and it's, I know when people hear the word adoption, it gets painted like Christmas, right? It gets painted as this wonderful thing. But what people need to understand is that for a child to be adopted, they have to have lost. It's the adopted parents that win. It's the child that loses. So even on our birthdays, we find it hard to celebrate because that's the day that we was separated at birth from our mothers so traumatically. Now, I want to bring something up because it's all about suicide, and I have so many adoptees don't understand why they're suicidal, right? And you have the public don't get it. You had a lovely life. You know, we've got adoptees that went to lovely homes, but they're still suicidal. So a couple of years ago, I actually wrote something. I'm just going to grab it because I've left it up at my desk. And I wrote something in a Facebook group. I think it was my own group, and somebody said, could I please share it? And I thought, well, yeah, that's fine. I didn't think much about what I had written. I didn't see the depth of what I had written until I saw the responses, and it actually went viral. Like, I couldn't believe the responses. My phone was going off every few seconds from people responding to what I had written. And I just want to read it out, and then I'll read some of the responses. So I said, for adoptees as newborns, we believe that we and our mothers are one. Our life force comes from her. It's not until we're about 10 months old that our brains realize we are not physically connected. That's when we make small moves and we physically move away from her. And as toddlers, we begin to discover and test that separateness. So when we're taken at birth from our mothers, we thought we were going to die, literally. Many adoptees will share how they felt death stalking them all their life. Some act on it because it gets overwhelming. When they stole us from our mothers, we felt death at every breath, at every cry for her. Adoptees died inside, never recovered. The true self died as well, and within the adoptive family, another self emerged, a pretend self to take the place of the original self that died. As an adopted person, it has taken me a long time to understand this. This is why it's so hard for us to fit in with our adopted families and within our biological families. Our trauma is pre-verbal, and we're still in trauma. We died and came back to life as someone else. If you're lucky enough to get a good adoptive home, you're a chance of surviving, not thriving. But for other adoptees who grew up in abusive homes, we died over and over again. We are 4 times more likely to suicide than non-adoptive people. We have no way to explain how we feel, and we're still struggling to find professionals that actually get it. I think adoptees often become people pleasers, not for the fear of rejection, but for the fear of feeling like you're dying all over again. That's why we stay silent. We endure abusive behaviours from others because rather than feel that terrifying pain, we don't want to feel that terrifying pain of dying all over again. Now, many people have written books and they talk about grief and loss. Somehow I got a lot deeper than that and said, no, it's greater than grief and loss. We actually feel, when that starts to arise, we feel like we're going to die. Because if you can imagine, a baby separated at birth, we were hidden in the hospital. We weren't nursed. There were many babies that were never adopted for many months, even years. So they had to just be placed and put aside. And the only thing that they were touched was to change the nappy and feed them. So here's some of the responses that I got, and I can't read them all because it was just huge. Oh my, so OMG, so true. I felt this all my life, that death was close. I never thought I'd live to be 18. Then I was surprised I made 30, and now I'm 50. Thank you for explaining why I felt this all my life. Nailed it. Yes, these words brought me to tears. I read my life in them. I never felt I belonged anywhere, struggling to get through every day as an adopted person. It ruined me inside. Lifelong suicidal ideation, acted on it a few times because I'd rather be dead than live with adopters. We died and came back to life as someone else is so profound. I cannot remember ever having happy dreams as a kid, just dreams of dying. It just goes on and on and on. Death stalked me, perfectly true. That happened to me. Exactly right. Your words resonate with me very much. Wow, you said it all right. Unfortunately, it's so true. Only another adoptee can know this kind of trauma. And that one more, a mother wrote, I wish I'd known this before I gave my baby away. I thought he would have such a good life, and he did, but I don't think he's happy. When I found out he was struggling, I was so confused. I remember thinking if he was going to struggle, he could have done that with me. Wish I knew this before I put my son up for adoption. I noticed the quotes in an excerpt from a book or a blog. Where can I buy it? Kerri Saint's words are powerful and eloquent. Thank you for sharing the experience. Your words resonate with me very much. This is perfect. It's so true. Sadly, this rings true. Rings true. Rings true. It just goes on. Rings true. I read this, I'm thinking, my God, I could have written this myself. You described me. This is my life. Wow, also true. This is probably the truest thing I've ever heard about separation trauma. Yes, this is exactly how I felt all my life. Spot on. So true. Like, it just goes on and on and on. Checks every box. And
so it's really, it's obviously resonated with a lot of people. And I love what you've said about, since you've been speaking more publicly about this, more and more people have reached out to you, because I think it's so good for people, as much as what I can intellectually understand that. And as a healer, I can understand what that must be like.
Mm.
But I can never fully identify with your experience or anything even similar to that. So I think it's so important that people who've had these experiences can identify with each other and move forward in the direction of healing, of understanding. You guys are not, you're not alone. There have been a lot of people that have experienced something similar. And I'm sure there's so much, if I just look at you, there's so much good that's come out of your experience, what you're doing for people and how you assisting others to come to terms with this and recognize it and understand it. It's interesting, because what would you say about a situation like this, but let's say it's not a forced adoption in the way that we've been talking. Let's say a mother willingly gave her child up because for whatever, there are a multitude of reasons. What would you say about children who are products of those types of adoptions? Do you think it's still the same? It's
Same.
as traumatic? Yeah.
It's same. Because
Yeah, I would have
if
thought
the
so.
baby's not allowed to finish the birthing process, it's removed immediately at birth. So we all know that when a baby's born, there's they go on a fright and flight, and they need to be placed on mum and feel her and hear her heartbeat, and they'll settle, and then the oxytocin sets in, and then they know that everything's okay in the world with mum. But if they don't get that opportunity, then when is it ever okay in the world?
Mm-hmm.
And
Absolutely.
so it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter whether you went to a good home or not. That separation at birth will mess you up for the rest of your life. If you're forever grappling to stay grounded and understand your value and your worth within the world you live in, and you will often become people pleasers. When you grow up in a non-biological family, you have, because you don't have someone in front of you mirroring back to you who you are, you're kind of on guessing ground, and you're actually masking, and you're actually becoming a good actor at picking up the cues of other people who are quite foreign to your DNA. And it might seem very subtle, but it's very profound.
Oh yeah.
So it's not So it's not until you actually meet some of your biological family when those little movements, or the eyebrows, or the smile, or the same color hair, or the same color eyes, or the way that you tell a joke, or your hands, whether they're the same. Adopted people will just zone in on those things. And we zone in on those on other families. When we see family members, biological family members together, we see likenesses in ways that other people don't. We're attuned to see it because we crave it so much for ourselves.
Yes, absolutely.
So, adopted people are probably the best actors you would probably ever come across. And not that we're consciously thinking about it, but it's because by default we've had to fall into it. And because we have society telling us that we should be grateful and happy that this happened to us. I mean, that goes against everything in your fiber to go, well, I was torn away at birth from my family and I'm supposed to be happy about it.
Yeah.
It's throwing. So no wonder adoptees suffer from autoimmune diseases and have such mental health issues and stuff, because everything that happened to them was abnormal, and we're told to act as if it's normal.
What do you think is the pathway to healing then for adoptees? Because I so understand what you're saying. It's, that birth process, and up until 10 months, you kind of feel like you're still attached to mom. And then you kind of wiggle your way and start tantruming in the terrible twos. I mean, it's such a natural process. And it's a beautiful one. So I think there would be some people, let's say, if they're adopted, if the parents were killed or maybe abandoned them or something like that. So it really is an adoption of compassion. Because I also think there would be different situations through which people are adopted. What would you say to one of those where, let's say, the parents were killed, or as you say, the parents have abandoned the children, or it was a war situation and kids were just there and needed homes or stuff like that? I understand that it's always traumatic. What would be, in your opinion, the pathway to healing adoptees?
Okay. My first one would be owning it. The first thing is to own it and acknowledge that these things happened and that you're in trauma, and surrounding yourself with people who allow you to do that. Because what holds you back are the people who, if you're around people that are continually telling you to ignore that inner pain and that inner voice and that trauma and everything's happened to you, they're not the right people to speak to. You need to search, and this is why adopted people get on very well with other adopted people. We actually say things, you can see them going, you know exactly how I feel. I don't have to explain it, right? Yeah. I'll give a twofold thing on this. So being completely transparent about how you feel and honest about how you feel and owning it, and what you're feeling is perfectly normal for what happened to you. Because a lot of we shove a lot of our emotions down, thinking we're, I should be happy. My mum didn't want me or whatever. Well, no, what happened to you was abnormal, and it's perfectly normal to have a meltdown about it and to be upset about it. That's not like, if someone found out tomorrow their mother died, how do you react? You're going to have all this grief and poor adoptees never given that chance, right? I was told my mother died giving birth to me. Pass the peas, please. So for a lifetime, I've struggled to even express grief because I wasn't allowed to. So when my son died, my son was 17 and a half. He died in 2017. And when I was told the news that he had passed away, I was shocked. When I look back and I think about the way I handled it, it's the way I've handled life in general. Okay, it's like when I was told my mother died giving birth to me, pass the peas. And it's taken me a long time to try and get in touch with the grief because I've been denied it for so long, but I'm acknowledging it. I'm owning it. I'm looking at it, go, I know why I've struggled to express grief over the loss of my own son is because I was denied that ability to grieve over my own losses as a child. So if you are an adoptive parent, this is what I told them through the Senate inquiry, you should never treat adoption as if you were raising your own biological child. We come with a whole set of different rules. And that, yes, adoptive children have a far better chance of growing up happy and healthy in an adoptive family that acknowledges that they acknowledge the trauma and the pain and the grief and the loss and that birthdays suck and that you're not their biological parents and you're going to have all these hurdles. If adoptive parents can acknowledge that, one of my adoptees said the most perfect thing. They said, what advice would you give an adoptive parent if the adopted child wanted to find their natural mother and father? And it was, if you help your child find themselves, you will find them too, right? So because until we find our natural family, we're a pretend version of what you want us to be, right? So when we find our natural family, we're not going to choose them over you. But we need that information to find ourselves. Absolutely. To be complete in the world, right? Now, some people go looking for spiritual ways to feel for healing, and I'm one of those people. I've sort of looked in a lot of different ways. I can never leave God out, right? And he's been really great at teaching me my value and my worth because I had to grow up knowing that my worth was only in working. It was only in what I had to do for the adoptive parents. So I was one of those people who couldn't sit still for 5 minutes. I had go, go, go. And my bosses loved me. I was a high achiever when it came to owning my own business. Never sat still. And then I got hit with this rare autoimmune disease where I was bedridden. I couldn't see, couldn't walk, couldn't talk, couldn't anything. And I'm just thinking, I'm not going to survive this. And what's the point? What value do I have? I can't even wash a plate at the sink for my child, who was 10 at the time. I might as well just curl up and die. Now, the day that I was thinking of it, the day that I was going, God, I can't do this. So there's no way. I was in pain from my head to my toe, the bottom of my feet. It was like I'd stuck my hand in an electric socket, and it was nauseous. It was the most horrendous thing. I thought I was dying. I felt like I was dying, but I thought I didn't have the capacity to fight it, and I thought I might as well just give up. And my child was 10, and he came into the room, and there was something on the TV about suicide, about a mother committing suicide, come on, like a current affair ad or something. And my son was 10, and he looked me square in the eye, and he said, "Mummy, you would never do that to me. I would die without you." And he grabbed his chest. He said, "I couldn't live without you." This is at a time where I was unable to get out of bed to do one thing for him. And it was like God had said, "See, like, you don't have to do anything. You are loved because you exist." Right?
Absolutely.
Right. And that was huge for me. That was a starting point to grasp that I have greater value than I've ever seen in myself. My adopted parents could have treated me like the way they did. And, you know, I was pushing and pushing myself to go, my value is only in do. And I have a child who innocently just says, "Mummy, please be here." Like, not that he knew I was suicidal. Like, that was the scary bit. Like, he had no idea. But out of the mouth came something that was meant for me to hear from the most important person.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And, you know, I sort of lent more to understanding my value in Christ and what he's taught me as a human being, and what he went through to tell me he loved me. And I hang on to that. I really pull towards that, and that's what's pulled me more out of the depths of despair than anything else. So and you know, like some people, because a lot of religious institutions did horrific things to people through forced adoption, a lot of them don't turn to God. You know, they took God and the way that they treated people, they sold as this is God's way because, you know, you're a sinner. And it was the most horrendous thing that they have done. Any person that took a child like that or demands to take a child from a mother does not worship or serve the God that I know. Because the Bible talks about the greatest work that anybody will do is to save the widow and the fatherless. Doesn't mean that you take the child and you kick the widow. And widow is not that just that her husband is dead. It means she's been abandoned by the man that's supposed to care for her. You don't kick her to the curb and steal her child.
Yeah.
And so we all know what the enemy's done. He's taken who God really is. He's inverted everything. He's changed everything to make it look as though that God is standing there with a big stick to hit somebody because they stepped out of line socially or whatever. And that's what they did. And that upsets me the most. And that people are not looking to someone who could tell them their intents were, because these religious organizations and the nuns and the priests and whatever have sold God as this tyrannical, you know, expectant that your only value and worth is being this pure person who, you know what I mean? Like, that you've got to fit into this society's standards. And that's not, well, to me, that's not who God is.
Well, I think what's so important in any type of healing, and especially, I would imagine when it comes to adoptees, especially when you're explaining how adoptees feel.
Yes.
And I think what really would be the healing force there would definitely be that reconnection back to God, source, divine spirit, divine creator.
Yeah.
And feel that complete connection. And when we feel that reconnection, and where, as you say, you are brilliant just because you exist.
Correct.
You are loved just because you exist.
Yep.
There's no preconceived ideas. It's that the pain kind of melts away. That's the only way I can say stuff like that, you know. And when we remember who we are,
yes,
all of the stuff has a wonderful way of dissolving. It doesn't change what happened.
No.
You know, I always say not even God can change the past. But then we have some kind of a divine understanding of why that happened. And then we can understand that gifts of that experience we can now use to serve and assist others in a non-judgmental, no more pain type scenario. We've healed them, right?
Yes, yeah. Well, you know, I've come to understand that the enemy hates woman because she can create, right? Satan can't create life, so he hates them. So what does he do is he makes sure that they suffer in the worst ways so that their whole sense of who they're meant to be is destroyed. Yeah. And who better to use it than somebody who has a misconstrued concept of who God is?
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
if I can come in as, you know, a church or a religious organization and an individual and tell you that you're worthless and you're nothing but garbage because you've had a child out of wedlock, you're going to walk away thinking that's really what God thinks of you. But it's not that at all. But we know if you look deeper, that's what's behind it. You know, that at the end of the day, that's what the driving force is that, you know, we've got this enemy that wants to destroy our value on who we really are. So he steps in and impersonates God in the most awful of ways to tell people that and make them believe that. I don't know how many people I've spoken to where you may share a little bit about your experience and they go, oh, I'd never walk into a church, they stole my baby. You know, if this is God, I don't want nothing to do with him. But at the end of the day, if they allow themselves and if they're open to hearing the other version of God, they have a better chance of finding their true value.
Absolutely. And that's really what it is. And I think you've completely hit the nail on the head there with the two words, true value. When we realize our true value, no one can ever take that away. And I honestly wish that for each and every person that has been adopted and that feels they don't belong or they're not worthy or whatever other manifestations around that, that you realize your true worth and your true value, because then you'll realize why God, you have the sacred contract with God so that you can show others the same thing. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
Kerri, it's been... Sorry, carry on.
No, I was going to say what really stood out for me, I went to an adoptee retreat recently and we had someone there doing some exercise and people doing deep breathing. And when you exhale, you're going to make this deep sound to exhale. Now, I was at the back of the room and there was about 20 odd people in there. And I'm going to tell you now, this will really hit home. There was not one adoptee that was able to make a sound outside of their body at all. Wow. And the room was quiet and the facilitators were going deep breath and let out, you know, and I had to put my hand up. It's the same thing. Nothing came out. So because we're being told and it's been enforced on us not to make a sound.
Wow.
Not to make a sound. And I couldn't believe it. So this goes right back to their birth. This goes right back to their inability to express how they really feel. So they didn't feel the freedom to be able to exhale with this sound. You know, I just thought it was fascinating. I thought, wow, look, you know.
Very, very fascinating indeed. I think that's amazing. It's amazing to see these subtle differences, because these are the subtle differences that tell you everything you need to know, actually, right?
Yeah, wow. Definitely. And I just want to share that in the sense of, if you're not an adopted person and you're listening to this and you've heard some of this and you hear someone say that they're adopted, ask them how they really feel. Ask them to share their story. The minute that you show the slightest sort of in the sense of the past narrative, oh, you must be grateful, or how wonderful to be adopted, try and refrain from that. Ask them and say, I really would love to hear how you feel being adopted. I want to support you in that, because that's what will gain adoptees a greater step towards healing, is when other people allow them to express exactly what they feel and what they want to feel. And they may not have the words because our trauma is pre-verbal. They may just need to sit and have someone put their arms around them and cry. You know, maybe just the heavy sigh that they were never allowed to do. We need to exhale, and we need to be able to let some of this trauma out. And so if you happen to know somebody who's adopted who keeps saying, I'm fine and I'm happy, I'll guarantee you that they're not.
Yeah.
If you really want to know, they will tell you. They won't tell you if they don't feel safe. And a lot of adoptees do not feel safe at all to tell you the truth.
Wow. So true.
Yeah. So, yeah. So, yeah, I'm going to keep on doing what I'm doing. And if people are interested in hearing my songs, they've just got to go over to Kerri Saint at bandcamp.com and check out my songs. And you'll actually hear the real, the emotion behind the words from the singer.
We would love to post the links here. So if you could just get those links to me of your songs, your groups, wherever people can join, where they can get hold of you, Kerri.
Yes.
That'd be great. And we can just post it in the description area below so that if there's anyone who wants to reach out, knows anyone, would maybe, and just, you know, out of just human curiosity and compassion, just learn to understand more about what you guys have gone through as well, you know. I think every healer or aspiring healer needs to hear these stories as well, because we're dealing with so many people who've been hurt in so many ways on this planet that it's beautiful to understand more about how we can support each other on this journey of looking home. Yeah. Kerri, it's been an absolute pleasure connecting with you again. Yep. I would definitely like to have you on again in the future, just to catch up and see how things are going there in Australia. Thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for being a voice for all the adoptees and mothers and children, fathers and children, just being a voice and creating awareness around this topic that really deserves so much airtime. So guys, I want to ask you please just to like, share, subscribe, get these videos out there. We will be getting a little short clip of the videos as well. Morné and Thea put that together, and just, you know, like 5 minutes of just Kerri will be saying something. Maybe just share the shorts as well. Those short clips are often the very powerful ones that get people's attention on these topics. So when you see those coming out, please just share them. Knowledge is power. It's how we learn. It's how we heal. So thank you, Kerri. Really, really, really appreciate your being here.
Thank you, Chantelle. Thank you very much.
Yeah. God bless you.
You too.
Thank you, guys and girls. As I said, please share, like, share, subscribe. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, BitChute, Telegram. Rumble is the channel we're kind of moving over to a lot. So please go and like us on Rumble as well. And yes, look forward to seeing you all in the very near future. Have a beautiful, beautiful weekend. And we'll catch up with you very soon. God bless you all.